Hello, brothers and sisters. Nowadays, we are more divided and confused in regard to our plight and condition than at any previous time in history. Millions of us are now insisting that we're our own worst enemies while defending our oppressors in spite of such a brutally horrific history of the contrary. There are also millions of us insisting that we're not from Africa, but are instead the true indigenous Americans. They do so although millions of us have taken DNA analysis that have scientifically, irrefutably confirmed our African identity. There are also millions of us now insisting that we're the true Jews found within a Bible that was in fact written by our most ungodliest enemies and that was brutally beaten into the blood-soaked minds of our enslaved ancestors. That belief system makes no sense at all whatsoever. There's nothing intelligent about believing it, but yet it's literally believed by millions of us today. Those who defends the belief always points to the Bible's book of Deuteronomy to justify it. However, if the Bible is true and we're the people of Deuteronomy chapter 28, then how come that scripture says that those people will exodus from bondage upon reaching 400 years of captivity? However, we've now been in bondage for more than 400 years. This profound contradiction exists because a Bible that strongly condones slavery, written by history's proven most ungodliest group, and the ungodly way of which it was originally brutally introduced to we Africans, totally disqualifies the Bible from containing the true words of God. What oppressive forces have our people so mentally enslaved that telling Black mental liberating truths now literally offends millions of us? We also now have millions of us that are insisting that we're being controlled by the silly Willie Lynch myth. But Willie Lynch never existed. The literature was actually written in 1970 by Dr. Akina Ashanti. He described our condition based upon what he personally witnessed during modern times. This is why it appears so accurate. This is also why when experts examined the letter, they found that it contained modern words that are not consistent with its presented 1700 date. Furthermore, the Willie Lynch myth presents what would in fact be the least plausible scenario and least effective method used for controlling generations of millions of people. To believe that myth, a person would have to in fact be totally ignorant of how true brainwashing is achieved, because that myth is absolutely not how true brainwashing works, is how it works. It's totally false. When we assign our plight and condition onto a work of fiction, we are making damn fools of ourselves. We also now have millions of us that are ridiculously insisting that we made the N-word ours and that using it now ridiculously empowers us. However, those narratives are both, in fact, the opposite of the truth. It was actually white men that manipulated us to collectively call ourselves by the N-word through negative media social engineering. Because they control our media images, they're able to negatively steer our culture. And using the N-word does not empower us. Repeatedly calling ourselves by the N-word actually conditions us to perceive ourselves through a false, inherent subordinate identity that aids the white society in maintaining its social dominance over us. Their N-word programming of Black people has worked so well that nowadays many Black people will accept any ridiculous presented reason to continue calling themselves by the N-word. This is the case in regards to the word of niggas. Millions are now insisting that because it's an ancient African Ethiopian word that means king, that this presents a good reason to now call ourselves niggas, a word that sounds remarkably similar to the original N word. This, in fact, makes as much sense as learning that the word shit was originally an ancient African word meaning king, and thinking that it presents a good reason to therefore now call ourselves shit. Our people are literally now drowning in disinformation. And because of this fact, we're now more divided and confused than at any previous time in history. To find the culprit behind this fact isn't really that hard to figure out. Just start critically thinking and ask yourself, who benefits most when we're within this collective state? And who controls what we believe and therefore has the ability to place us within this collective state? The answer is what oppressive forces does. It's by deliberate design that we're currently within this collective state that clearly benefits the system of white supremacy. White propagandists have deliberately spread lots of false knowledge into the Black communities. It's a warfare tactic that facilitates their long-term oppression of us. They've spread lots of false information into our communities that are designed to divide and confuse us, thus preventing our ability to unify ourselves in ways that are necessary in order to liberate ourselves. What they've done to us is essentially very much like the Bible's fictional account of the Tower of Babel, wherein which millions of people came together to build a tower to reach heaven. Therefore, God changed their language to divide and confuse them, thus preventing their ability to communicate in ways that were necessary in order to continue building the tower into heaven. Likewise, what oppressive forces have spread so much fraudulent ideologies into the Black communities that are designed to divide and confuse us, thus preventing our ability to unify ourselves in ways that are necessary in order to liberate ourselves. More specifically, white propagandists have deliberately spread lots of false knowledge into the Black communities because doing so keeps us divided and confused, thus impeding our ability to unify and liberate ourselves. They also know that as long as our understandings of our plighted condition are kept flawed, then all of our liberating remedies and strategies that stems from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. It's an absolute fact that in order to liberate ourselves, we must gain a clear, concise, and accurate understanding of our plight and condition. Because if our understandings are flawed, all of our strategies that stems from them will also be flawed. This is why those of us who know the truth must teach African proverb. The truth of our plight and condition is that Black people have been deliberately socialized by the white society. Socialized is when the dominant culture exploits their monopoly over information and media images that are fed into the minds of the subordinate population to manipulate the subordinate population to think and behave in ways that are beneficial to the dominant culture. To socialize a people, it literally means to brainwash a people, to mentally enslave them. White social scientists describe this nefarious practice as merely instilling a value system into the collective minds of the oppressed that makes the oppressed adhere to the existing infrastructure and authority of the dominant culture. Throughout histories, those empires that were brutally oppressive have always prevented the oppressed from seeking retribution against them by socializing them. And people that have been socialized rarely, if ever, learns of this fact. But those behaviors that exist amongst our people that are being misdiagnosed as being symptoms of the Willie Lynch myth are actually the results of us having been socialized by the white society. And as I've stated earlier, to socialize people literally means to mentally enslave and brainwash them. There are 4 ways to effectively brainwash an entire generation of people: by what they're taught, by what they see, by what they hear, and through repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, the media images we see, the societal narratives that we repetitively hear, through repetition, what oppressive forces have socialized the collective minds of millions of Black people to think in ways that are against our own self-interest and that instead serves and protects the interests of the white society, is the truth of our plighting condition. They first begin the socializing process during our early education and development with a whitewashed curriculum when our minds are young and most impressionable. And they continue the process throughout our entire lives through unrelenting white media propaganda campaigns. This is all possible because regardless of how intelligent people are, if it's possible to control the input of information and media images that people receive, it's entirely possible to control what they'll believe and how they'll behave and even how they'll think. It's possible to socialize them. Those of us who are telling you the truth are trying to free you from a mental prison that you don't even know you're trapped within. And it's very challenging because millions of our people have been socialized to literally function as wardens of their own mental prisons. Brothers and sisters, time to wake up. If you're still walking around believing in a Willie Lynch myth, or you're calling yourself by the N-word, or you're praying to the God of godly enslavers, you have a socialized mind. Wake up.